8:55 a.m. Reception lobby of Alston Group. A line of people in expensive suits stretched down the hall. Daniel Reeves, 37, single dad, worn dress shirt, borrowed tie, clutching his resume. He was here for the final interview. His last hope to pay for his daughter's tuition. When he extended his hand to greet CEO Victoria Alston, 31, she glanced at his calloused, oil-stained palm, wrinkled her nose, and stepped back. "I don't shake hands with people who don't meet standards." Staff members laughed quietly. Daniel stood frozen. But that very night, the company's system crashed catastrophically. And the next morning, Victoria stood at Daniel's door, breathless, saying words no one expected. "Please, I need a meeting with you." Daniel Reeves was 37 years old, a single dad, once a brilliant systems engineer, but he'd quit 3 years ago to care for his wife before she passed away. Now he worked multiple odd jobs to support his daughter Sophie, 7 years old. This interview at Alston Group was his last chance to return to the tech industry. Daniel arrived early, nervous but determined. When it was his turn, Victoria walked into the room with commanding presence. White suit, black hair pulled back tight, eyes sharp and cold. Daniel stood up to greet her, extended his hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Victoria glanced down at his hand, saw the calluses, the old machine oil stains. She pulled her hand back. "I don't shake hands with people who don't maintain standards." The conference room went silent for a few seconds. Then someone laughed quietly. Daniel withdrew his hand, embarrassed but trying to stay composed. Victoria continued the interview coldly, criticized his outdated certifications, said he was behind the times. Daniel left the room in silence, humiliation rising up to his throat. But when he got home, Sophie hugged him and said, "Dad, you don't need to be fancy. You're the smartest person in the world." Daniel forced a smile. He didn't know that tonight at Alston Group, everything would change. At midnight, Alston Group's entire server system crashed. Nobody could fix it. And when Victoria reviewed the system logs, only one name appeared. Daniel Reeves. The interview had been brutal. Daniel sat across from Victoria and 2 other executives. They fired questions at him rapid fire. "Your last position was 3 years ago. What have you been doing?" "Taking care of my family," Daniel said simply. "That's a significant gap," Victoria said coolly. "Technology moves fast. How do you know you're still relevant?" Daniel kept his voice steady. "I've been studying independently, following industry developments. I may not have a corporate title, but I haven't stopped learning." Victoria's expression didn't change. "That's not the same as real experience." "With respect," Daniel said, "I have 12 years of systems architecture experience. I built platforms that are still running today." "We're running," Victoria corrected. "Past tense." Daniel felt the sting but didn't respond. One of the other executives spoke up. "Your resume shows you specialized in legacy systems. We're looking for someone who can handle modern infrastructure." "I understand both," Daniel said. "Legacy systems are often the foundation. You need to understand them to build effectively on top." Victoria stood up. Interview over. "We'll be in touch." Daniel knew what that meant. Rejection. As he gathered his things, Victoria's eyes lingered on his hands again. The rough skin, the evidence of manual labor. "Mr. Reeves," she said, "in this industry, appearance matters. First impressions matter." Daniel met her gaze. "I understand, but I came here to offer my skills, not my appearance." Victoria's jaw tightened. "Skills are only valuable if people trust you have them, and trust starts with presentation." Daniel nodded. "Thank you for your time." He walked out with his head high, but inside he felt crushed. That evening, Sophie asked about the interview. "How did it go, Dad?" Daniel smiled for her. "I did my best, sweetheart. That's all we can do." "Did you get the job?" "Not yet, but there are other opportunities." Sophie hugged him tight. "Anyone who doesn't hire you is stupid." Daniel laughed. "Thanks, kiddo." He tucked her into bed, read her a story, kissed her goodnight. Then he sat at his old computer, started browsing job listings again. His phone had no messages, no callbacks, just silence. Meanwhile, across the city, Victoria was still at the office. She prided herself on working harder than anyone, on being tougher, more exacting. She'd built Arlston Group from a small startup to a major corporation, through sheer will and refusing to accept anything less than perfection. That's why she'd rejected Daniel's handshake. He didn't fit her standards, didn't look the part. But at 11:47 p.m., her phone rang. "Miss Arlston, we have a problem. The main servers are down." Victoria's blood went cold. "What do you mean down?" "Completely offline. We can't access any client data. The system is in an infinite loop." Victoria rushed to the office. Her entire IT team was there, frantic, panicking. "How long has it been down?" 30 minutes. We've tried everything. Nothing's working." Victoria watched them work. 7 hours straight. Nothing. At 6 in the morning, one engineer said quietly, "The guy who interviewed yesterday, he specialized in this type of system architecture." Victoria remembered the worn shirt, the calloused hands, the handshake she'd refused. "Find his address," she said. "Ma'am, now." 40 minutes later, Victoria stood outside a modest apartment building. She'd been awake for 24 hours. Her suit was wrinkled. Her hair was falling loose. She knocked on the door. Daniel opened it, saw the CEO who'd humiliated him standing on his doorstep. "I need your help," Victoria said without preamble. "The company needs you. Please." Before Daniel could respond, Sophie peeked around him. "Dad, who's that?" Victoria looked at the little girl. "I'm someone who made a mistake." Daniel stared at Victoria. The woman who'd refused to shake his hand was now standing at his door, asking for help. "What kind of mistake?" Daniel asked carefully. "The kind that might cost me everything," Victoria said. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the edge of panic. "Our entire system is down. 7 hours. My team can't fix it, and we're losing millions by the hour." Sophie tugged on Daniel's sleeve. "Dad, she looks tired." Victoria glanced down at the girl. Something in her expression softened. "I am very tired." "You should sit down," Sophie said with the confidence only a 7-year-old has. Daniel made a decision. "Come in." Victoria stepped inside the small apartment. It was nothing like her penthouse, but it was warm, clean, lived in. Daniel made coffee. Victoria sat at the small kitchen table while Sophie colored nearby. "Tell me what happened," Daniel said. Victoria explained. The system crashed at midnight, infinite loop, no access to client data, potential losses in the tens of millions. "What did your team try?" Victoria listed everything. Standard protocols, emergency rollbacks, manual overrides. Daniel listened, asked questions. His mind was already working through possibilities. "I need to see the system," he said finally. "Does that mean you'll help?" Daniel looked at her. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because people's jobs depend on that system working." Victoria nodded. "I understand. But I have conditions," Daniel continued. "Sophie comes with me. I'm not leaving her alone." "Of course," Victoria said. "We'll set up a space for her." Sophie looked excited. "I'm going to your work, Dad." "Just for today, sweetheart." They drove to Arlston Group in Victoria's car. Sophie was fascinated by everything. Victoria kept glancing at them in the rearview mirror. "How long have you been raising her alone?" Victoria asked. 3 years, Daniel said. "That must be difficult." "It's worth it." Macha, Victoria was quiet for a moment. "I admire that." At the office, Victoria led them to a conference room, set up coloring books and snacks for Sophie, then took Daniel to the server room. His team looked skeptical when they saw him, the guy in the worn shirt who'd been rejected yesterday. "This is Daniel Reeves," Victoria said. "He's here to help." One engineer muttered, "We've tried everything." "Then try something you haven't thought of," Victoria said sharply. Daniel sat down at a terminal, started reviewing logs. The room was silent except for keyboard clicks. 15 minutes in, Daniel stopped. "This isn't a technical failure," he said. Everyone looked at him. "What do you mean?" Victoria asked. Daniel pulled up specific log entries. "These changes were made manually. Someone altered the system deliberately." The room erupted in whispers. Victoria's face went pale. That's impossible. Only senior staff have that level of access. Look at the timestamps, Daniel said. These changes were made over the past 2 weeks. Small modifications that wouldn't be noticed individually, but together they created a cascade failure. Who? Victoria's voice was ice. Daniel traced the access codes. Someone with administrative privileges. The modifications originated from an internal terminal. Victoria pulled up the access logs. Her hands were shaking slightly. The terminal belonged to Henry Garrett, VP of Finance, and her main competitor for CEO. Henry, Victoria whispered. The engineers looked shocked. Henry had been with the company for 8 years. Can you fix it? Victoria asked Daniel. Yes, but I'll need to undo all his changes. It'll take a few hours. Do it, Victoria said. Then she turned to her security chief. Find Henry, now. Daniel worked methodically, line by line, reversing the sabotage. Victoria watched him. This man she dismissed, who was now saving her company. Why are you helping me? She asked quietly. After what I did, Daniel didn't look up from the screen. Because it's the right thing to do. I was cruel to you. Yes, you were. Victoria flinched. I'm sorry. Are you sorry you did it? Or sorry you need me now? Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Both, but mostly the first one. Daniel finally looked at her. Why did you refuse to shake my hand? Victoria sat down. For the first time, she looked vulnerable. Because I was afraid. Of what? Of being wrong, Victoria admitted. I built this company by trusting my instincts, by reading people quickly, and my instincts said you didn't fit. Because of my hands. Because you look like you'd struggled, Victoria said. And I've spent my whole life avoiding struggle, running from it, building walls against it. Daniel understood. So you rejected me before I could fail. Yes, Victoria said. I was protecting the company, but really I was protecting myself. They worked in silence for another hour. Daniel fixed the system piece by piece. Sophie came in at one point. Dad, when are we going home? Soon, sweetheart. Sophie looked at Victoria. Are you still tired? Very, Victoria admitted. You should take a nap like me, Sophie said seriously. Victoria smiled, a real smile. That's good advice. At 2 p.m., Daniel finished. Systems restored, all data intact. The engineers cheered. Victoria closed her eyes in relief. Thank you, she said. Henry was found trying to leave the country. Security brought him back. Victoria called an emergency board meeting, presented the evidence. Henry was fired and arrested. The company was saved. But as Daniel prepared to leave, Victoria stopped him. Wait, please. Daniel turned. I need to say something, Victoria said, in front of everyone. She led him to the main conference room, called in all senior staff. This is Daniel Reeves, Victoria announced, the man I refused to hire yesterday, the man whose hand I refused to shake. The room was silent. He saved this company, Victoria continued. While I was judging him by his appearance, he was the most qualified person in the room, and I nearly lost everything because of my arrogance. She turned to Daniel. I'm offering you a position, head of systems architecture, whatever salary you want, whatever conditions you need. Daniel looked at her, at this powerful woman who was publicly admitting she was wrong. I need to think about it, he said. Victoria nodded. I understand. Take all the time you need. But as Daniel left with Sophie, he realized something had changed. Victoria hadn't just learned a lesson about judging people. She'd seen something in him she'd never expected to find. And he'd seen something in her too. Beneath the ice, there was a person. Scared, trying, human. Daniel took 3 days to think about the offer. He wanted the job, needed it even. But he'd been hurt, publicly humiliated, and he wasn't sure he could work for someone who treated him that way. On day 4, Victoria showed up at his apartment again. This time she looked different. Jeans, simple sweater, hair down. I'm not here as your potential boss, she said. I'm here as someone who owes you an explanation. Daniel let her in. Sophie was at a friend's house. They sat at the same kitchen table. Tell me, Daniel said. Victoria took a breath. I built Arlston Group from nothing. I was 22. fresh out of business school. Everyone told me I was too young, too female, too inexperienced. Daniel listened. So I became hard, Victoria continued. I refused to show weakness. I judged people before they could judge me. I built walls so high that nobody could see the person inside. And when you saw my hands? Daniel prompted. I saw someone who'd struggled, Victoria said, and struggle meant weakness to me. So I rejected you before you could prove me wrong. She looked at him. But I was wrong. You're not weak. You're the strongest person I've met. You sacrificed your career for your wife. You're raising your daughter alone. You came to help me even after I humiliated you. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Why are you really here, Victoria? Because I want you to take the job, she said. But more than that, I want you to know I'm sorry. Truly sorry. Apology accepted, Daniel said. But I need to know something. What? If I take this job, will you treat me with respect? Or will I always be the guy you almost rejected? Victoria met his eyes. You'll be the man who saved my company and taught me I don't have to be cold to be strong. Daniel made his decision. I'll take the job on one condition. Anything. You let me help you fix the culture here, not just the systems, the way people treat each other. Victoria smiled. Deal. They shook hands. This time she held on firmly, didn't let go immediately. Your hands tell a story, Victoria said softly. I should have wanted to hear it. 2 weeks later, Daniel started officially. Victoria introduced him at a company-wide meeting. This is our new head of systems architecture. He's brilliant, he's kind, and he's going to change how we do things here. The staff applauded. Some looked confused. Wasn't this the guy she'd rejected? But Daniel proved himself quickly. He redesigned the infrastructure, trained the team, made the systems more stable than they'd ever been. And he did something else. He changed the atmosphere. He remembered people's names, asked about their families, treated the janitor with the same respect as the executives. People noticed, and they started doing the same. Victoria watched it happen, watched Daniel transform her company not through authority, but through example. One evening, they were working late, reviewing a project timeline. Can I ask you something personal? Victoria said. Sure. Do you ever get lonely raising Sophie alone? Daniel set down his pen. Every day, but she's worth it. What was your wife like? Daniel smiled. Kind, patient. She made me laugh. She believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. She sounds wonderful. She was, Daniel said, but she's gone. And I have to keep living. For Sophie. For myself. Victoria was quiet. I've never had that. Someone who believed in me like that. What about your family? They believe in my success, Victoria said. Not in me as a person. There's a difference. Daniel understood. That's lonely in a different way. Yes, Victoria agreed. It is. They worked in comfortable silence. Then Victoria's phone rang. She answered. Her face went pale. I'll be right there, she said. She hung up, stood up quickly. What's wrong? Daniel asked. My father. He's had a heart attack. I need to go to the hospital. I'll drive you, Daniel said immediately. You don't have to. I'm driving you, Daniel said firmly. You're in no state to drive. They rushed to the hospital. Victoria was shaking the entire way. He's all I have, she whispered. We're not close, but he's all I have. Daniel reached over and took her hand. He's going to be okay. At the hospital, they waited. Hours passed. Victoria's usual composure was gone. She was pacing, wringing her hands. Finally, a doctor came out. He's stable. It was mild. He'll recover fully. Victoria nearly collapsed with relief. Daniel caught her. Thank you, she whispered into his shoulder. Thank you for being here. Where else would I be? When they let Victoria see her father, Daniel waited outside. 30 minutes later, Victoria emerged. Her eyes were red. He said something, Victoria told Daniel. He said he was proud of me. First time he's ever said that. That's good. But he also said, Victoria continued, that he's worried I'm alone, that I've built a company but not a life. Daniel didn't know what to say. And he's right, Victoria said. I have everything, and nothing. They drove back in silence. At the office parking lot, Victoria didn't get out. Daniel, she said, can I tell you something? Of course. When you held my hand in the hospital, Victoria said, it was the first time in years I felt like someone actually cared. Not about my company, not about my success, just about me. Daniel's heart beat faster. And it scared me, Victoria admitted, because I realized something. What? Victoria turned to face him. I realized I care about you too, not as my employee, not as the man who saved my company, but as Daniel, the person who makes Sophie laugh, who treats everyone with kindness, who saw past my walls. Daniel didn't know how to respond. I'm not asking for anything, Victoria said quickly. I know it's complicated. I'm your boss. You lost your wife. We barely know each other. But I needed you to know. Daniel looked at her, this powerful woman who was finally letting herself be vulnerable. Victoria, he said, I need time to process this, to figure out what I'm feeling. I understand, Victoria said. Take all the time you need. But as Daniel drove home, he realized something. He was feeling something too. Something he hadn't felt since his wife died. Hope, connection, the possibility of not being alone anymore. And it terrified him, but it also felt like coming alive again. Over the next few weeks, something shifted between them. Victoria stopped being just his boss. She became his colleague, his friend. She'd stop by his office with coffee. Thought you might need this. She'd ask about Sophie. How was her recital? She'd stay late when he was working on a difficult problem. Not to supervise, just to keep him company. Daniel noticed, and slowly his walls started coming down too. One afternoon, Sophie's school called. She was sick. Daniel needed to pick her up immediately. He rushed into Victoria's office. I'm sorry, I have to leave. Sophie, go, Victoria said without hesitation. Family first, always. Daniel left. But an hour later, Victoria showed up at his apartment with soup, children's medicine, and Sophie's favorite books. You didn't have to do this, Daniel said, stunned. I wanted to, Victoria said simply. Sophie was on the couch, wrapped in blankets. She smiled when she saw Victoria. Miss Victoria. Hi, sweetheart. I heard you're not feeling well. My tummy hurts, Sophie said. Victoria sat beside her. I brought you some books, and soup, and this. She pulled out a stuffed bear. He's very good at making people feel better. Sophie hugged the bear. Thank you. Daniel watched them. Victoria was gentle with Sophie. Natural, like she'd done this before. Have you always been good with kids? Daniel asked. Victoria looked surprised. I don't know. I've never really been around them. But Sophie's easy to love. That evening, Victoria stayed. She helped Daniel make dinner, read Sophie a bedtime story, sat with them while they watched a movie. It felt domestic, comfortable, right. When Sophie fell asleep on the couch between them, Victoria whispered, She's beautiful. You've done an amazing job with her. Thank you, Daniel said. It hasn't been easy. The best things never are, Victoria said. They carried Sophie to bed together, tucked her in. In the hallway, Victoria turned to Daniel. Can I be honest about something? Always. I've been terrified of this, Victoria admitted, of feeling something for someone, of needing someone. I built my whole life around not needing anyone. And now, Daniel asked. Now I think maybe I was wrong, Victoria said. Maybe needing someone isn't weakness. Maybe it's just being human. Daniel stepped closer. I've been terrified too, of letting someone in, of replacing Sarah, of failing again. You won't fail, Victoria said softly. How do you know? Because you don't give up on people, Victoria said, even when they give up on themselves, even when they refuse to shake your hand. Daniel smiled. You're never going to let that go, are you? Never, Victoria said, but she was smiling too. The next week, Victoria did something unprecedented. She invited Daniel and Sophie to dinner at her penthouse. Daniel was nervous. Are you sure? That's a big step. I'm sure, Victoria said. I want you to see where I live, who I am outside the office. Her penthouse was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows, modern art, expensive everything, but it was also cold, impersonal, like a hotel. Sophie looked around. It's pretty, but where are your pictures? Victoria paused. Pictures? Of your family, your friends. We have lots at our house. Victoria's smile was sad. I don't have many pictures. Sophie frowned. That's sad. Everyone should have pictures. After dinner, Sophie drew a picture. Of the three of them, she gave it to Victoria. Now you have a picture, Sophie said proudly. Victoria stared at the drawing, her eyes filled with tears. Thank you, Sophie. I'll treasure it. Later, after Sophie fell asleep on Victoria's couch, Daniel and Victoria stood by the windows. Your daughter is wise, Victoria said. She is, Daniel agreed. I've lived here for 5 years, Victoria said. And she's right. It's not a home. It's just a place. What makes something a home? Daniel asked. Victoria looked at him. I think it's people. The ones who see you, who know you, who choose to stay. Daniel's breath caught. Daniel, Victoria said, I know I said I'd give you time, and I meant it, but I need to tell you something. What? Every day I spend with you and Sophie, I feel more alive, Victoria said. More real. More like the person I want to be instead of the person I thought I had to be. She took his hand. I'm not asking you to feel the same way, but I needed you to know. You've changed my life. Daniel looked at their joined hands, her smooth palm against his calloused one. You've changed mine too, he admitted. I thought I'd never feel this way again. Never want to open my heart again. And now I think maybe I'm ready, Daniel said. To try. With you. Victoria smiled, a real unguarded smile. Really? Really? They stood there, looking out at the city lights, holding hands. And for the first time in years, Victoria's penthouse felt like it might become a home. 6 months later, Arlston Group held its annual company celebration. Daniel stood in the same lobby where Victoria had once refused to shake his hand. But everything was different now. He was head of systems architecture, respected, valued, and Victoria was beside him, not as his boss, but as something more. They hadn't made it official yet, taking things slow, for Sophie's sake, for their own. But everyone knew, the way Victoria looked at him, the way he smiled at her, the way they'd transformed each other. Victoria took the stage to give her speech. This year has taught me something important, that the best solutions often come from unexpected places, from people we might overlook, from kindness we didn't know we needed. She looked directly at Daniel. A year ago, I made a mistake. I judged someone by their appearance instead of their character. I refused to shake his hand because I thought he didn't meet my standards. The room was silent. But he exceeded every standard I have, Victoria continued, not just professionally, but as a human being. He taught me that strength isn't about being hard, it's about being brave enough to be vulnerable. She stepped down from the stage, walked directly to Daniel. Daniel Reeves, she said, I never properly apologized for that day. Daniel smiled. You apologized several times. But not like this, Victoria said. She extended her hand, palm open, waiting. Will you shake my hand? Victoria asked. Not as your boss, not as the CEO, but as someone who respects you, admires you, and loves you. The room gasped. Daniel looked at her outstretched hand, at the woman who'd once rejected him, who'd learned to let people in, who'd opened her heart. He took her hand. Yes, I will. They shook hands, but this time it meant everything. Applause erupted, the entire company standing, cheering. Sophie, who'd been watching from the side with Daniel's neighbor, ran up. Does this mean Miss Victoria is your girlfriend now, Dad? Daniel laughed. I think so, sweetheart. Sophie hugged Victoria. Good. I like her. I like her too, Daniel said, looking at Victoria. Victoria knelt down to Sophie's level. And I like both of you, very much. Are you going to come to our house more? Sophie asked. If that's okay with you, Victoria said. It's okay, Sophie said seriously, but you have to help make pancakes on Sundays. Victoria laughed. I can do that. That evening after the celebration, the The three of them sat in Daniel's small living room. Sophie was showing Victoria her collection of drawings. Victoria admired each one with genuine interest. "You're really good at this," Victoria said. "Dad says I get it from Mom," Sophie said. "She was an artist." Victoria glanced at Daniel. He nodded. It was okay to talk about Sarah. "Your mom must have been very talented," Victoria said. "And very special." "She was," Sophie agreed. "But she's in heaven now. And Dad says she'd want us to be happy." "She would," Daniel confirmed. Sophie looked at Victoria. "Are you going to make Dad happy?" Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "I'm going to try my very best." "Good," Sophie said, "because he deserves it." After Sophie went to bed, Daniel and Victoria sat together on the couch. "Your daughter is remarkable," Victoria said. "She is," Daniel agreed. "She's wise beyond her years." Victoria rested her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for giving me a chance. After everything." "Thank you for learning to reach out," Daniel said, "for being brave enough to try." They sat in comfortable silence. Then Victoria lifted her head, looked at him. "Daniel, I have one more question." "What's that?" Victoria took both his hands in hers. "These hands, the ones I refused to touch. They're the hands that saved my company, that held me when I was scared, that take care of your daughter with such love." She squeezed them gently. "Can I hold them? Not just tonight, but every night?" Daniel pulled her close. "Yes, you can hold them forever." They kissed, soft, tender, full of promise. And in that small apartment, with Sophie's drawings on the walls and the sound of the city outside, they built something new. Not a company, not a career, not perfection, but a home, a family, a love that started with a refused handshake and became something neither of them expected. Sometimes the hand you refuse to shake is the one that will hold yours when you need it most. Sometimes the person you judge too quickly is the one who will teach you what really matters. And sometimes the best things in life come from being brave enough to reach out again. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Heart Healing Stories for more emotional journeys that remind us we're never truly alone. Hit that subscribe button and join our community of hope and healing. Thank you for listening.